Hello?
Hello.
Oh, wow. I got through.
You did.
Uh this is Cherry. I'm calling from Portland, Oregon.
Cherry. Well, welcome to your first call, if you will.
Yeah, I feel so honored.
Well, I do too, in a way. What's on your
Yeah.
mind?
I just wanted to call in and just talk a little bit about um what has been going on in Portland, Oregon over the past few months with the George Floyd protests and the BLM movement here, on top of going through a national pandemic. Um, I'm also experiencing houselessness and am queer. Um, and I've been homeless for about 2 years now.
Oh boy, I'm
Um,
sorry to hear that, Cherry.
yeah, um, it's been quite a journey. I've learned a lot, and like living outside during a pandemic is very scary, to say the least,
Yeah.
and very uncertain, even more than usual. But in Portland, like since the protests started, and there was like a bunch of like property damage and windows broken and stuff, all these businesses um, in downtown Portland put up like wood panels and like boarding on all of their windows for blocks and blocks of like downtown Portland, which is like the center of the city, obviously. And that's the area that I typically like am like I sleep down there most of the time. That's where a lot of my like friends and like my street family are. And like this past summer when like they were tear gassing, it was very scary. And like I don't feel like a lot of the media, especially like mainstream media, of course, really portrayed what was like happening down here, and like the experiences that a lot of like people in the city like were experiencing. Like the protests and the police like were inescapable for a really long time, and that's obviously like a really privileged statement for me to say. But like downtown, it's just they closed during a lot of the protests. They closed a huge sections of the city for blocks, like putting like huge square miles of the downtown area where there's like huge concentrations of houseless people. And that was like like a point or an experience that I haven't really seen a lot of people in the media really discussing,
I
like
know,
at all.
Cherry. I know the answer to this, but was there any form of either municipal or non-governmental agencies that were able to provide any support for folks without houses?
To an extent, um, there at near the beginning of the protests and when the COVID lockdowns were like first when that was like first starting, like that time period. There were a few like affinity groups and different community organizations that were already like before COVID working on like different squatting projects, and community like mutual aid housing projects. Like I'm a part of a anarchist collective, and when the COVID shit started happening, we lost our building, which was a public retail space. And we just couldn't afford that because we also couldn't be open. And one of our main sources of income was having like live music.
Mm.
Um, and we ended up getting an RV to help provide like mutual aid and like mobily. and help provide like also like different educational materials and health supplies and food to other people and help connect different communities with resources like that, like with housing resources. That's still work in progress, but there are a lot of different affinity groups and community like mutual aid groups that have like formed since the like start of COVID and during the protests. A lot of these mutual aid and like affinity groups that were working on this stuff, a lot of them like got distracted, and a lot of
Right.
the work that we were doing near the beginning of the year just completely went off course. But there are a couple of houseless camps that were set up at the beginning of the COVID crisis, like within the first few months, that are partial. I'm not 100% sure how the funding works, but they are partially funded by the city of Portland, and I'm pretty sure the county. And there are 3 different houseless camps that were set up to help provide socially distanced like shelter for people. It doesn't have covering, but there's like electricity and bathrooms and hand washing stations there. And it's all of them, from what I've heard from friends of mine that have been staying there, they're very much so community driven. And so the folks that are like living there and are staying there are the people that are helping like run safety shifts and like volunteering to do that, and volunteering to help cook food for everyone else and help, that kind of stuff.
So Cherry,
which is really awesome.
Yeah, that. So, I mean, but I hear what you're saying correctly, is just that, I mean, and I would imagine it's a continuance of an already problematic dynamic, is that there's very little attention paid by the media, broadly speaking, and by society writ large to the plight of people who are living without houses in Portland.
Yeah.
But I imagine that's also, the case across the country. Let me ask you this, if you don't mind me asking, how did you come to lose your housing?
I came to lose my housing. It was, it's kind of a bit of a story. I have been, like doing like protesting and community organizing in, the city, for like, since it was like 15. But after I was at Occupy ICE PDX. I was one of the founding members of that occupation. And after that ended, me and a group of people from that camp, we all decided to move in together and have a communal house. Long story short, like a friend of ours, one of our roommates, passed away at the beginning of 2019. And I had, during that time period, I had picked up substance abuse and was addicted to opiates, and ended up having to move back in with my mom for a period of time, because I am also disabled. I have epilepsy, and am in the process of getting trying to apply for disability. And I had to move back in with my mom, and I was there for less than 2 months before there was an incident where one of my, there was just this whole incident that happened, and I ended up getting kicked out, and was living outside downtown with a couple friends of mine that I had met at that house. And yeah, I started living outside, just doing my own thing. Yeah, pretty much it.
Well, Cherry, I appreciate your, your calling in, and I wish you the best of luck. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and like I've also like I've been poor like my whole life. Like I remember going to school like every single day, pretty much, except at the beginning of the month, like with dirty clothes on. And so being houseless is like something that like things could be a lot worse, and I try to focus on like the good things, and I think that that is something that everybody should be doing. But just one thing I wanted to say was during the BLM protests this past summer, there were countless houseless people that were not involved with the protests at all, that were just like sleeping nearby the parks, like in parks nearby or in doorways nearby where the protests were happening, that kept getting tear gas.
Right.
Oh man.
And were like waking up in tear gas. And the cops, like I saw multiple, like countless times, the cops just arrest random houseless people that were doing literally nothing, and just woke up to cops being everywhere and chemical weapons being deployed.
Cherry, just let me ask you this one question. If there was, I know there's probably a whole host of things that they need to happen, but what would be, from your perspective, like what would be the thing that your city or your state or federal government, or they could do that would have the most immediate impact? I mean, maybe it's an obvious provide housing, but from your perspective, what is it?
Well, other than like obviously like fucking like give us resources and like money and housing, but one of the biggest things that has been a huge pain in the neck as a houseless person in the city, especially like during COVID, during a pandemic, is the fact that the city and the county and the state are still sweeping houseless camps and are still kicking like people that are living out of their cars out of like areas that are vacant, and like kicking out squatters that have been squatting like in buildings for months, if not years. And yeah, and like just also just don't like continue the eviction moratorium, like because there's a ban on evictions right now, or I think it's about to expire or whatever. But like also not overloading the system even further with the limited amount of resources that are already available. And yeah, just stop the sweeps and like give people housing and places to take showers and to like take a shit. There are only 9 public bathrooms downtown in Portland. There are only 9 public bathrooms, and they are not cleaned frequently at all. And this is during a global pandemic that has killed like millions of people. Like, it's ridiculous.
All right, Cherry, last question. Is there an agency that you found that has been particularly effective, non-governmental one, or that has been helpful to you, that people maybe, if they want to, can support?
Yeah, well, there's this organization that receives like government dollars, but they also have like they do a lot of community outreach. It's called Outside In. That's a really good organization that provides a lot of health resources and medical care to like low-income folks and a lot of houseless people. They have a needle exchange that a lot of people use, and they just opened one in Clackamas, which is a like suburb here. And that organization's really good. They have a sliding scale for their clinic. And a lot of the folks that work there are really awesome. Also, there is a group called Free Hot Soup here in Portland that is a community organization, and they just are people that get together that cook food and have hot meals, serve hot meals to houseless people. And that's a really amazing organization here. And yeah, I'm trying to think of other ones I could mention, but I'm kind of spacing.
Well, Cherry,
on top of my head.
Thanks for calling in. Hang in there. Good luck. I'm sorry you're in this situation, and we'll put links to those organizations Outside In and Free Hot Soup on our page. Hang in there. Call in again if you get a chance.
Also, I just thought of another organization. There's a group called PPOP, Portland People's Outreach Project, and they do a lot of various types of mutual aid to houseless people, mostly in North Portland. And they also provide, it's a needle exchange, but they do other outreach and resource shares to the community. And they've been going out every week, out and walking around to help people get safe supplies, to stay safe, because also the overdose death rate has gone up dramatic, a lot.
Yeah.
During this time period. So that's also a really good organization to support, completely community led. And yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Cherry.
Thank you.
All right, Cherry, hang in there. I appreciate the call.
Yeah, of course. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Folks, we're not going to have time for any more calls. Apologies.
That's just going to get, if there's no infrastructure in place, and if a city like Portland, which is supposedly progressive, they're doing such little, 9 public bathrooms, it's just going to...
Yeah. It's going to be tougher as it gets cold. We'll put a link to those organizations there. I certainly am guilty of not even contemplating the implications of ongoing protests and street fighting with houseless communities. And it's, those folks are consistently overlooked, obviously. Literally and metaphorically in our society, because it makes it just a little bit easier for us to go about our day when we don't have to contemplate that there are people who are, for whatever reason, have no homes. And that's very, very difficult to sort of it's not even a question of clawing yourself out of there. There is in some ways, it's sort of binary at that point for most people. You cannot get a toehold in any respect in society without having a place to live and some leg up. We're seeing programs around the country that are more like test pilots, and they're sadly just funded by private people, right. But with payments, direct payments. There's been a lot of evidence that direct payments help people in these circumstances, that they know what will help them the best. Compton is one of those cities that is doing it. And I think I've talked about that. Maybe we're going to have him on, I think, at one point. But Hudson, New York, doing a small pilot program of that.
But even then, look at a city like New York. You know very well, to be able to even rent an apartment, you have to qualify. The qualification standards, I don't even think people understand this. We're not talking like you good credit. We're talking you have to make 40 to 60 times
right.
the monthly rent to qualify to get an apartment in New York City. And of course, people figure out ways and they become roommates and, there's illegal sublets and all that. And that's a big part of, but it is so every step of the way, there are barriers. And if you're already without a home, you're just, it's almost impossible to get, it's
they say it's incredibly expensive to be poor.
Yes.
It's also extremely difficult. I mean, that may sound obvious, but it's just sort of like the idea of doing the most basic things that we take for granted. We're able to do those things because we have a foundation of existence. We have some of the foundational elements that make everything else that much easier.
Right.
And stripped of those, and that becomes your primary objective every day. How am I going to go to bed in a place where I am safe and not exposed to the elements or other people or whatever it is? The idea of whatever, dealing with an addiction, or the idea of getting a job, or the idea of planning long term, when primary objective today, make sure that I am not sleeping in an exposed area, that I'm able to actually shut my eyes and wake up in the morning.
Yep.
Really difficult. Appreciate the call, Cherry.